Hi there, you guys. I hope you had a good weekend. I took yesterday off, Sunday. Hopefully you had a good day with your families. And here we are. It's Monday, and I hope you're doing all right at home. I'm thinking of you. And I've got a poem and, of course, more of Tuesdays with Morrie for today. So let's get to it. The poem is by one of my favorite poets. I feel like I say that every time, but it's true. So today it's a guy named Wendell Berry, and his poem is called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Such a beautiful poem, and I feel like it really captures where we are kind of today, right? The despair of the world feels very strong, and Barry is kind of saying that we always have nature, and we always have the presence of nature, the peace of nature. Nature, of course, is on its own sort of schedule. And if we can just sort of tap into that, tap into this grace of the world, as he says in that last line, there's a freedom in that, and there's a way to kind of rest in that and find a little bit of peace and comfort. So maybe at some point today, you'll be able to find that, especially if you're able to go outside for a little bit. You can just maybe find a couple of minutes where you tap into, as Barry says, the peace of wild things, the presence of still water, and the grace of the world. So I hope you can find that at some point today. Let's go back to Morrie. So here we are back in our book, and we're right where we left off, but this page starts a new section, obviously, and it starts with an epigraph. And the epigraph says, "A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops." And that's by Henry Adams. Our next chapter is called The Fourth Tuesday We Talk About Death. "Let's begin with this idea," Morrie said. "Everyone knows they're going to die, but nobody believes it." He was in a businesslike mood this Tuesday. The subject was death, the first item on my list. Before I arrived, Morrie had scribbled a few notes on small white pieces of paper so that he wouldn't forget. His shaky handwriting was now indecipherable to everyone but him. It was almost Labor Day, and through the office window I could see the spinach-colored hedges of the backyard and hear the yells of children playing down the street, their last week of freedom before school began. Back in Detroit, the newspaper strikers were gearing up for a huge holiday demonstration to show the solidarity of unions against management. On the plane ride in, I had read about a woman who had shot her husband and 2 daughters as they lay sleeping, claiming she was protecting them from the bad people. In California, the lawyers in the O.J. Simpson trial were becoming huge celebrities. Here in Morrie's office, life went on one precious day at a time. Now we sat together a few feet from the newest addition to the house, an oxygen machine. It was small and portable, about knee-high. On some nights, when he couldn't get enough air to swallow, Morrie attached the long plastic tubing to his nose, clamping on his nostrils like a leech. I hated the idea of Morrie connected to a machine of any kind, and I tried not to look at it as Morrie spoke. "Everyone knows they're going to die," he said again, "but nobody believes it. If we did, we would do things differently." "So we kid ourselves about death," I said. "Yes, but there's a better approach. To know you're going to die and to be prepared for it at any time, that's better. That way you can actually be more involved in your life while you're living." "How can you ever be prepared to die?" Do what the Buddhists do. Every day, have a little bird on your shoulder that asks, "Is today the day? Am I ready? Am I doing all I need to do? Am I being the person I want to be?" He turned his head to his shoulder as if the bird were there now. "Is today the day I die?" he said. Morrie borrowed freely from all religions. He was born Jewish, but became an agnostic when he was a teenager, partly because of all that had happened to him as a child. He enjoyed some of the philosophies of Buddhism and Christianity, and he still felt at home culturally in Judaism. He was a religious mutt, which made him even more open to the students he taught over the years. And the things he was saying in his final months on earth seemed to transcend all religious differences. Death has a way of doing that. "The truth is, Mitch," he said, "once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." I nodded. "I'm going to say it again," he said. "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." He smiled, and I realized what he was doing. He was making sure I absorbed this point without embarrassing me by asking. It was part of what made him a good teacher. "Did you think much about death before you got sick?" I asked. "No," Morrie smiled. "I was like everyone else. I once told a friend of mine in a moment of exuberance, 'I'm going to be the healthiest old man you ever met.'" "How old were you?" "In my 60s. "So you were optimistic." "Why not? Like I said, no one really believes they're going to die." "But everyone knows someone who has died," I said. "Why is it so hard to think about dying?" "Because," Morrie continued, "most of us all walk around as if we're sleepwalking. We really don't experience the world fully because we're half asleep doing things we automatically think we have to do." "And facing death changes all that?" "Oh yes, you strip away all that stuff and you focus on the essentials. When you realize you are going to die, you see everything much differently." He sighed. "Learn how to die and you learn how to live." I noticed that he quivered now when he moved his hands. His glasses hung around his neck, and when he lifted them to his eyes, they slid around his temples as if he were trying to put them on someone else in the dark. I reached over to help guide them onto his ears. "Thank you," Morrie whispered. He smiled when my hand brushed up against his head. The slightest human contact was immediate joy. "Mitch, can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said. "You might not like it." "Why not?" "Well, the truth is, if you really listen to that bird on your shoulder, if you accept that you can die at any time, then you might not be as ambitious as you are." I forced a small grin. "The things you spend so much time on, all this work you do, might not seem as important. You might have to make room for some more spiritual things." "Spiritual things?" You hate that word, don't you? Spiritual. You think it's touchy-feely stuff. "Well," I said. He tried to wink, a bad try, and I broke down and laughed. "Mitch," he said, laughing along, Even I don't know what spiritual development really means, but I do know we're deficient in some way. We are too involved in materialistic things, and they don't satisfy us. The loving relationships we have, the universe around us, we take these things for granted. He nodded toward the window with the sunshine streaming in. You see that? You can go out there, outside, any time. You can run up and down the block and go crazy. I can't do that. I can't go out. I can't run. I can't be out there without fear of getting sick. But you know what? I appreciate that window more than you do. Appreciate it? Yes. I look out that window every day. I notice the change in the trees, how strong the wind is blowing. It's as if I can see time actually passing through that window pane, because I know my time is almost done. I am drawn to nature like I'm seeing it for the first time. He stopped, and for a moment we both just looked out the window. I tried to see what he saw. I tried to see time and seasons, my life passing in slow motion. Morrie dropped his head slightly and curled it towards his shoulder. Is it today, little bird? He asked. Is it today? Letters from around the world kept coming to Morrie, thanks to the Nightline appearances. He would sit, when he was up to it, and dictate the responses to friends and family who gathered for their letter-writing sessions. One Sunday, when his sons, Rob and John, were home, they all gathered in the living room. Morrie sat in his wheelchair, his skinny legs under a blanket. When he got cold, one of his helpers draped a nylon jacket over his shoulders. What's the first letter? Morrie said. A colleague read a note from a woman named Nancy who had lost her mother to ALS. She wrote to say how much she had suffered through the loss and how she knew that Morrie must be suffering too. All right, Morrie said when the reading was complete. He shut his eyes. Let's start by saying, Dear Nancy, you touched me very much with your story about your mother, and I understand what you went through. There is sadness and suffering on both your parts. Grieving has been good for me, and I hope it has been good for you also. You might want to change that last line, Rob said. Morrie thought for a second and then said, You're right. How about, I hope you can find the healing power in grieving. Is that better? Rob nodded. Add, thank you, Morrie, Morrie said. Another letter was read from a woman named Jane, who was thanking him for his inspiration on the Nightline program. She referred to him as a prophet. That's a very high compliment, said a colleague. A prophet? Morrie made a face. He obviously didn't agree with the assessment. Let's thank her for her high praise and tell her I'm glad my words meant something to her. And don't forget to sign, Thank you, Morrie. There was a letter from a man in England who had lost his mother and asked Morrie to help him contact her through the spiritual world. There was a letter from a couple who wanted to drive to Boston to meet him. There was a long letter from a former graduate student who wrote about her life after the university. It told of a murder-suicide and 3 stillborn births. It told of a mother who died from ALS. It expressed fear that she, the daughter, would also contract the disease. It went on, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. Morrie sat through the long, grim tale. When it was finally finished, he said softly, Well, what do we answer? The group was quiet. Finally, Rob said, How about, thanks for your long letter? Everyone laughed. Morrie looked at his son and beamed. The newspaper near his chair has a photo of a Boston baseball player who is smiling after pitching a shutout. Of all the diseases, I think to myself, Morrie gets one named after an athlete. You remember Lou Gehrig? I ask. I remember him in the stadium saying goodbye. So you remember the famous line. Which one? Come on, Lou Gehrig, pride of the Yankees, the speech that echoes over the loudspeakers. Remind me, Morrie says. Do the speech. Through the open window, I hear the sound of a garbage truck. Although it is hot, Morrie is wearing long sleeves with a blanket over his legs, his skin pale. The disease owns him. I raise my voice and do the Gehrig imitation, where the words bounce off the stadium walls. Today, I feel like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Morrie closes his eyes and nods slowly. Yeah, well, I didn't say that. The fifth Tuesday, we talk about family. It was the first week in September, back to school week, and after 35 consecutive autumns, my old professor did not have a class waiting for him on a college campus. Boston was teeming with students, double parked on side streets, unloading trunks. And here was Morrie in his study. It seemed wrong, like those football players who finally retire and have to face that first Sunday at home, watching on TV, thinking, I could still do that. I have learned from dealing with those players that it is best to leave them alone when their old seasons come around. Don't say anything. But then I didn't need to remind Morrie of his dwindling time. For our taped conversations, we had switched from handheld microphones, because it was too difficult now for Morrie to hold anything that long, to the lavalier kind popular with TV news people. You can clip these onto a collar or lapel. Of course, since Morrie only wore soft cotton shirts that hung loosely on his ever-shrinking frame, the microphone sagged and flopped, and I had to reach over and adjust it frequently. Morrie seemed to enjoy this because it brought me close to him, in hugging range, and his need for physical affection was stronger than ever. When I leaned in, I heard his wheezing breath and his weak coughing, and he smacked his lips softly before he swallowed. Well, my friend, he said, what are we talking about today? How about family? Family. He mulled it over for a moment. Well, you see mine all around me. He nodded to photos on his bookshelves of Morrie as a child with his grandmother, Morrie as a young man with his brother David, Morrie with his wife Charlotte, Morrie with his two sons, Rob, a journalist in Tokyo, and John, a computer expert in Boston. I think in light of what we've been talking about all these weeks, family becomes even more important, he said. The fact is, there is no foundation, no secure ground on which people may stand today if it isn't the family. It's become quite clear to me as I've been sick. You don't have the support and love and caring and concern that you get from a family, you don't have much at all. Love is so supremely important. As our great poet Auden said, love each other or perish. Love each other or perish. I wrote it down. Auden said that? Love each other or perish, Morrie said. It's good, no? And it's so true. Without love, we are birds with broken wings. Say I was divorced or living alone or had no children. This disease, what I'm going through, would be so much harder. I'm not sure I could do it. Sure, people would come visit, friends, associates, but it's not the same as having someone who will not leave. It's not the same as having someone whom you know has an eye on you, is watching you the whole time. This is part of what a family is about, not just love, but letting others know there's someone who is watching out for them. It's what I missed so much when my mother died, what I call your spiritual security, knowing that your family will be there watching out for you. Nothing else will give you that. Not money, not fame. He shot me a look. Not work, he added. Raising a family was one of those issues on my little list, things you want to get right before it's too late. I told Morrie about my generation's dilemma with having children, how we often saw them as tying us down, making us into these parent things that we did not want to be. I admitted to some of those emotions myself. Yet when I looked at Morrie, I wondered if I were in his shoes about to die and I had no family, no children, would the emptiness be unbearable? He had raised his 2 sons to be loving and caring, and like Morrie, they were not shy with their affection. Had he so desired, they would have stopped what they were doing to be with their father every minute of his final months. But that was not what he wanted. Do not stop your lives, he told them. Otherwise, this disease will have ruined 3 of us instead of 1. In this way, even as he was dying, he showed respect for his children's worlds. Little wonder that when they sat with him, there was a waterfall of affection, lots of kisses and jokes and crouching by the side of the bed, holding hands. Whenever people ask me about having children or not having children, I never tell them what to do, Morrie said now, looking at a photo of his oldest son. I simply say, there's no experience like having children. That's all. There's no substitute for it. You cannot do it with a friend. You cannot do it with a lover. If you want the experience of having complete responsibility for another human being and to learn how to love and bond in the deepest way, then you should have children. So you would do it again? I asked. I glanced at the photo. Rob was kissing Morrie on the forehead and Morrie was laughing with his eyes closed. Would I do it again? He said to me, looking surprised. Mitch, I would not have missed that experience for anything, even though... He swallowed and put the picture in his lap. Even though there is a painful price to pay, he said. Because you'll be leaving them. Because I'll be leaving them soon. He pulled his lips together, closed his eyes, and I watched the first teardrop fall down the side of his cheek. And now, he whispered, you talk. Me? Your family. I know about your parents. I met them years ago at graduation. You have a sister too, right? Yes, I said. Older, yes? Older. And 1 brother, right? I nodded. Younger? Younger. Like me, Morrie said. I have a younger brother. Like you, I said. He also came to your graduation, didn't he? I blinked, and in my mind I saw us all there, 16 years earlier, the hot sun, the blue robes, squinting as we put our arms around each other and posed for Instamatic photos, someone saying, 1, 2, 3. What is it? Morrie asked, noticing my sudden quiet. What's on your mind? Nothing, I said, changing the subject. The truth is, I do indeed have a brother, a blonde-haired, hazel-eyed, 2 years younger brother who looks so unlike me or my dark-haired sister that we used to tease him by claiming strangers had left him as a baby on our doorstep. And one day we'd say, they're coming back to get you. He cried when we said this, but we said it just the same. He grew up the way many youngest children grow up, pampered, adored, and inwardly tortured. He dreamed of being an actor or a singer. He reenacted TV shows at the dinner table, playing every part, his bright smile practically jumping through his lips. I was the good student. He was the bad. I was obedient. He broke the rules. I stayed away from drugs and alcohol. He tried everything you could ingest. He moved to Europe not long after high school, preferring the more casual lifestyle he found there, yet he remained the family favorite. When he visited home in his wild and funny presence, I often felt stiff and conservative. As different as we were, I reasoned that our fates would shoot in opposite directions once we hit adulthood. I was right in all ways but one. From the day my uncle died, I believed that I would suffer a similar death, an untimely disease that would take me out. So I worked at a feverish pace, and I braced myself for cancer. I could feel its breath. I knew it was coming. I waited for it the way a condemned man waits for the executioner. And I was right. It came. But it missed me. It struck my brother. The same type of cancer as my uncle, the pancreas, a rare form, and so the youngest of our family, with the blonde hair and the hazel eyes, had chemotherapy and the radiation. His hair fell out, his face went gaunt as a skeleton. It's supposed to be me, I thought. But my brother was not me, and he was not my uncle. He was a fighter, and had been since his youngest days, when we wrestled in the basement and he actually bit through my shoe until I screamed in pain and let him go. And so he fought back. He battled the disease in Spain, where he lived, with the aid of an experimental drug that was not, and still is not, available in the United States. He flew all over Europe for treatments. After 5 years of treatment, the drug appeared to chase the cancer into remission. That was the good news. The bad news was my brother did not want me around, not me nor anyone in the family. Much as we tried to call and visit, he held us at bay, insisting this fight was something he needed to do by himself. Months would pass without a word from him. Messages on his answering machine would go without reply. I was ripped with guilt for what I felt I should be doing for him, and fueled with anger for his denying us the right to do it. So once again, I dove into work. I worked because I could control it. I worked because work was sensible and responsive. And each time I would call my brother's apartment in Spain and get the answering machine, him speaking in Spanish, another sign of how far apart we had drifted, I would hang up and work some more. Perhaps this is one reason I was drawn to Morrie. He let me be where my brother would not. Looking back, perhaps Morrie knew this all along. That's a good place to stop, you guys. So enjoy the rest of your day. Try to get outside if you can. I think we're expecting some snow for Monday here in Northeast Pennsylvania, but if you can get outside at all and just try to find that moment of peace in nature like Barry was talking about, that would be a good day. So enjoy the day with your families, and we'll keep up with our book tomorrow. Bye.